Welcome again, everyone. And I'm going to say my name again, just because it wasn't being recorded. It's Carolyn Lancaster from Randwick City Council. I'm the Children, Youth and Families Officer. And just again, directing you to the pages on our website for the parenting calendar that we do every 6 months, full of free parent carer activities, including this one. And some are face-to-face over weeks, some are remote. So really encourage you to look at that. We also have fabulous events on our What's On page that are free or very low cost through the library and the Sustainability Centre. I just want to say that we are living and working on Bidjigal land, Bidjigal and Gadigal land, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and anyone here that might be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. We are very lucky to live here, and I want to thank the owners who have not ceded the land and for their care of the land for tens of thousands of years, and the waterways and all their cultural heritage that we are so lucky to learn from. And I'm going to turn you over to Madeline, who will introduce her workshop. And just to let you know that in the last part of the webinar, we do have a question answer session, and you can put your questions in the Q&A box mine is at the bottom of the screen. I don't know where yours is, but just knowing that that'll be probably after 11, around 11:10, we'll start finishing up and going to the Q&A session there, and you can write your questions and I will read them out to Madeline and she will answer them. So without any further ado, I'm going to go on mute and take my camera off, and I'm going to turn you over to Madeline. And thank you so much, Madeline, for coming today.
My pleasure. It's one of my favorite things to do. So hello, welcome to Setting Limits Playfully, which isn't, for many of us, that's not the first place we reach when we're trying to set a limit with our children. But I will get to talk about all of that. And just as Carolyn said, you will have questions at the end, so feel free to go to the Q&A function and pop your question in there. And I too want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am living and working, the Wongal Aboriginal people of the Eora Nation, and to say that Aboriginal culture survives, it thrives, and we have all gained from what they've lost. And boy, did they look after this place well for such a long time. And thanks to Google, I'm language disabled. So I was raised with only English, more or less. So thank you to Google Translate. Let me know if I've got anything wrong here, but I really want to extend my welcome to you from wherever you come. And yeah, glad to hear. So there's a few things I like to start with. And the first thing that I think it's really important for us as parents to get a hold of is about really how good we are. We struggle. We spend a lot of time feeling bad about the places we haven't done well. And that is almost inevitable, I've come to believe, for parents, but we sort of have to take a certain attitude towards it. So I like to start with this, that you are a good parent and that you have always done the very, very best that you can. And if you could have done different, you would have. And when you can do different, you will. But you've done the very best that you can. And that as a parent, there are real struggles and difficulties, and you are not to blame for these. They're the circumstances under which you parent, and they leave a lot to be desired. It's most of what's difficult about parenting is to do with what we have to implement in the privacy of our own home, in the intimacy of the relationships we care most about. These forces reach into our families, and present challenges, and we have to navigate those. We don't really get an option. And someday you'll get a little rest. And here's my dear husband resting at our friend's house. They used to have this incredibly comfortable couch, and that's what he would do with it. We've been parents for a while, as you can probably tell from the grey hair. My daughter is 20. And after the webinar, we will send you out a recording and links to resources and a little feedback survey. So if you can fill that in, that'd be fantastic. And you're really welcome to book a short time with me if there's questions you have or things you wanting to work out, or just something wasn't clear and you want to clarify it. Do feel free to get in touch. I love to actually talk to real people and I do it through Zoom, so you can be anywhere, but do feel free to take up that offer. And when we send something out at the end, I'll send you a link to do that if you haven't already done it. But it's not worth struggling alone. We're left to struggle alone a lot in parenting. And at the very least, some company and another mind on the job can make a big difference. Today, I want to talk about why children need limits. And there's a bit of background that I need to give you so that you understand, in a way, so that you understand why we might use play as a tool for setting limits. And the goal is to give you a picture of a light touch in limit setting. Generally, what we have in our heads when we think about limits is something pretty firm, often pretty harsh, which is often how it was done with us, or how we end up doing it because we're under pressure and things are tight for us as parents. But that limit setting has got a bad rap, really. And it doesn't actually have to be something which damages your relationship with your child. It can actually be a vehicle for really building strength into your relationship with your child. And for all of that to work, you need support. Parenting is incredibly complex. So you need somewhere where you can process what's going on. And one of the things I love to do is I run parent support calls. And, you know, a lot of the time, the problems really aren't all that resolvable, but there's something about meeting with other parents in a space where nobody's pretending that it's all great and where you aren't going to get criticized. So just understanding that the struggles you have at home are part of something that pretty well every parent struggles with one way and another, that is really important and deeply reassuring as we try to figure out how to move our relationship with our kids forward. And we all make mistakes with the best of intentions, sometimes with bad intentions. We make mistakes, and we actually are going to keep making mistakes. Parenting is not a perfect art. And it's not a set of tips and tricks that if you just get it exactly right, you'll get the outcome you want. Human beings don't work that way. But we are really hard on ourselves when we make mistakes. And I think, you know, along with a first position of we are good parents, sort of being kind to ourselves and almost expecting that we'll make mistakes, and that what we need is a set of tools in our toolbox that are about fixing things up as much as they're about getting it right in the first place. So I love this little set of photos. Here's this duck doing the right thing, taking her little ducklings for a walk, and they meet an unexpected challenge, as you do when you're a parent. And they run into trouble. And I don't think she handled that all that well. So Oh, hang on. Our goal is to help you avoid, but also to recover from parenting fails. The recovery is as important, in my opinion, and it's the thing that you mostly have most control over. You do your best to prevent damage, but a lot of the time it's because of stuff that's going on outside your family and you are just having to handle it. So a little bit about me. This is my daughter a long time ago and my husband some time ago. I've done all sorts of different things. And the thing that I came to late, better late than never, is parenting. It's been just a marvelous experience. I'm so glad that my husband really, really, really wanted a child because I wasn't so sure myself. And I had been working with hand-in-hand parenting for many years before becoming a parent. So I had the luxury of really understanding these tools and this approach. But I found that it was as if she knew what to do. And she didn't have to go off to a class to sort of learn how to use this way of making sense of the world. And it reassured me that these tools I'd been working with for a long time really are, they're located in how humans function. And humans will do well with them. And our children don't need to be taught. We do, because we've gone a bit off track, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And then I just really got interested in connecting with other parents, and sharing these tools becomes a way of connecting with other parents. And as I said, I'll send you out some information about how to contact me, but I can recommend a short online course run by Hand in Hand, through Hand in Hand, about setting limits and building cooperation. And I'll send you out some information and resources about setting limits. And you're most welcome to organise some time with me to figure out if there's some more work we could do together to move things along, or get just a bit more information if you need it. And I love to hear about you and what sense you're making of all of this. A little bit about hand-in-hand parenting. I'm going to give you a framework for understanding what's happening in your ongoing relationships in your family, around your family, and with your child. And it's about a constant balancing between a sense of connection, which is really the thing that greases the wheels of family life, and in general is the thing that makes our relationships go well. And we teach a number of tools, and we teach some child-directed play to build your relationship with your child, and to strengthen the sense of connection, which you will borrow from when you need to offer correction. And setting limits and correcting kids, anyone really in the world who's off track, is essential, necessary, constant. And you'll be needing to make judgments on a case-by-case basis as to what's going to work best today. And yeah, so that's a balance between connecting and correcting. And to do that well, I call this the love triangle, and the foundation of that is the support that you get. You need plenty of support to keep figuring out this complex job. And altogether, you getting the support you need, you doing the connecting work that you need to do with your children, and offering them correction when that's needed, that all does this thing called building emotional safety. And that's what you want in your relationship with your child. You don't really just want a kid that obeys. You want a child who feels safe to show you where they're struggling and is confident that you're going to be able to give them a hand. That's what we're after. So parenting is limits. It took me many years actually of trying to communicate this with parents to understand there isn't this tricky thing out there called limit setting or boundaries. I don't like to use the word boundaries, but I may have time to talk about that later if you want. But it is a constant process of setting limits. A lot of the time you won't notice because the limit is set in a way that works given the circumstances. So you'll ask your child to do something, or you'll head in a certain direction and your child follows you happily. But the times where you do notice that you're doing it are the times when you've hit a spot where there's some difficulty, and we'll talk about what that is. But what I want to emphasize is that this is about your relationship with your child. This is not about some tricky tips or technique that you have to get exactly right. But I'm delighted to use this photo which is of these guys doing this amazing trick on penny farthings while they're juggling. I just thought, oh, well, sometimes parenting feels like that. That's not what you have to do. What you need to get really good at is understanding where you're at emotionally, where your kids are at emotionally, and what's going to work today. So you don't have to be perfect. As I said, you're not going to be perfect. You'll lose it sometimes. And the bigger challenge is how to fix things up once something's gone wrong. And it's really important to understand that the challenge of setting limits is about emotions. It's about how our children are feeling, and it's about how we're feeling. When we're in good shape, things often go easily. When we're stressed, they don't go so easily. When our children are well connected with us, things will go more easily. And when they're not, they won't. But that's a lot of what it's about. And just to touch on a favorite topic of parents. So this is my kind of brief overview of what the framework for setting limits in hand. And then we'll get to talk about playfulness. But basically, timeout is for you. You need a place where you can download your feelings, where you can get the support that you need, where you can think through challenges and plan them and get some help. It's really, really important. And sometimes the best thing that you can do in any particular situation is kind of get yourself out of that situation if you can. There are different ways of doing that. Sometimes you can leave the room. Sometimes you can leave your children in someone else's care. Sometimes you can just, and I'll talk about letting go of the rope, but, you know, lying down on the floor with small children, lying down on the floor and waving your arms and legs in the air, we call it the dead bug, is often a remarkably powerful way to just shift things out of a power struggle. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Time in is what your kids need. They don't need time out. You're the one who needs time out mostly. Children need time in to build their sense of connection with you and to process and resolve feelings that are getting in the way of their good functioning. And when they get a chance to do that, everybody, you know, when you get time out and they get time in, everyone ends up more flexible and relaxed and creative and cooperative. And we teach a listening tool called a listening partnership, which if we were in person, I'd get you to have a little go with the person who's sitting next to you. But just to give you a little idea of what it is, you would find a partner, and the idea is that you take equal turns listening and that you decide how long you've got, and you use a timer, because some people take up lots of space and other people don't take up that much space. And relationships don't work well if they get too uneven. And everyone actually has a story to tell. Some people find it more or less easy to tell those stories, but your job as listener is to listen with warmth, with your full attention. Don't interrupt. Don't give advice. This is not an advice giving or a problem solving exercise. You can do that in a different time. This is where someone just gets to tell their story. And often if we get at, if it feels safe enough, we'll often bump into feelings, which often as not, it's how we're feeling that's getting in the way of us being able to figure out how to resolve some difficulty in our relationship with our child. And it's really important that you keep it confidential, that you don't talk to someone else about what someone has told you in their listening time. That makes it safe for us to talk about how it really is, and know that it's not going to be referred to again. And listening partnerships can be used for all sorts of things. You actually don't need to talk about parenting. I find them useful for all sorts of things, but it's very helpful to put attention on how things were for you when you were young, because a lot of the time our neutral position in our parenting has a lot to do with how we were treated. So we can kind of absolutely try, make as good a decision as we can manage, that we won't ever yell at our kids, and we get stressed and out of our mouth comes a loud noise. Often that's because what we're channeling is what got done to us. So it's very useful to talk through your experience of how parenting was for you. So how were limits set in your own childhood? And now, what are your biggest triggers? The things that really trigger you often are often a really direct way to track back to what the challenge was when you were younger. And then, because today we're talking about playful limit setting, it's really useful to think about who played with you and what was it like. What I will say is that I've used to run regular play events, and where the adults decide to play in a way that gives the children the lead. And what I found is that some people are gifted players and other people are not. I'm actually not. And they would usually be able to tell a story about someone who really got down and paid attention to them and played with them when they were young. It's like they have a point of reference that I don't have. And that's very useful. Our children, if we can figure this out with them, will have a much easier time than in their parenting than most of us are having. So it's a long-term project. Time in for children, I just need to explain a little bit about why kids need limits, really. And what we find is that basically it's when a child is carrying emotional tension that they can't do what needs to be done or what's workable. I don't like to use, I love the word workable. In the end, it may not be exactly what you want, but if it's something which is workable in the situation, that is your bottom line. And the thing that stops kids from figuring out what's going to be workable in this situation is that they're carrying emotional tension, which is getting in the way of their thinking. And there's this really important distinction in this way of thinking about humans function. There's a really important distinction between feelings and thinking. In our culture, we're not good at being clear about the difference between those two things. And a lot of what gets presented as the right thing to do is actually people functioning from a whole bunch of feelings, not actually from thinking about the situation. So anyway, kids get into trouble when they're carrying emotional tension and when they lose their sense of connection with you. Connection with you is the absolute essential ingredient, more important than anything else. You do need to set limits. If you're just all the time being permissive because you don't want to wreck your connection, that doesn't work either. It really is a balance. But basically, when a child is carrying a heavy emotional backpack, they will feel disconnected. And then sometimes they actually have been disconnected from you. And what they'll do then is they will signal that they're in trouble. And behavior can be a signal that your child is in trouble. And what I would call that is off-track behavior. There's not good and bad behavior. There's behavior that's off-track. There's behavior that's not heading in a workable direction. And we're often really tempted to move in to try and fix whatever the thing is our child has just said or whatever difficulty our child has just encountered. you really don't need to fix things nearly as often as you think you do. What you more often are going to need to do is what we call bring a limit, and it's usually physical, and playful limit setting is a lot of it's about physically getting in there. But basically, when your kid is off track, you need to actually move in and interrupt them and connect with them. And usually what will happen, I sort of do this hand thing, they're chuffing along here, you set a limit, and what happens is the feelings that were driving their behavior are forced up to the surface. And your job then is to listen to those feelings. And if you do that well enough, what you'll find is that your child can think better on the other side of it. Yeah. So I love this quote from Patty Whitfler, who founded Hand in Hand in the US. It's now all over the world. When children are pushing our buttons, they can't feel anyone there. They're looking to push up against something so that they can tell they're connected. That's a lot of what's going on. And more than anything else, they need to feel connected. Connection is the oxygen for their minds. That's what they need. We often think what they need is more information, but actually it's connection. So it's important, I sort of alluded to this earlier, that there's this big difference between thinking and feeling. We find that a lot of the problem when things aren't going well is that someone's carrying a big lot of feelings. It's an emotional problem. We often treat the difficulty as if it's a cognitive problem. So we often meet a child's off-track behavior by explaining to them at length, why it is that what they're doing isn't okay, or trying to communicate things about your values. We don't hit each other in this family. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, but the problem is that your child actually usually already knows. What's happened is they don't care because they've filled up full of feelings. And that's why trying to set limits with words often doesn't work, and particularly without some physical connection. Trying to get your kid to do something from the other side of the room, it doesn't often work. You really need to get their attention and engage and connect with them for it to work. We have a rule of thumb, which is 5 words or less when you're setting a limit. If you've started saying more than 5 words, you're moving into assuming the problem is a cognitive one, and assuming that your child is in a brain space where they can make sense of what you're telling them. And by the time you've had to set a limit, that's really not where they're at. One of the other things that sort of catches us here is that, connected with that, is that we sort of feel like we need to teach our children if something's wrong. Now, there's a place when everyone's well connected and in good shape to talk about what's right and what's wrong, to put it briefly. But when you're in that moment where you're interrupting someone who's off track, they're not receptive to whatever lesson you have to tell them. And also, if you start trying to instruct them at that point, you're assuming that the problem is one of a thinking problem rather than a feeling problem. This is a complicated idea, and because I want to talk about playful limit setting, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but because it's about feelings, and because you don't need to teach them, because they don't need to go through a rational analytical process, you don't need to be consistent. This is a complicated idea. I could probably do a whole webinar just on this. But basically, what is really important is connection. And you may set a limit around something one day, and the next day and let it go the next day. And basically, your child isn't going to get confused, or if some tension builds up around that, you'll be able to sort it out using this framework. But we get very, very caught on consistency, and it's connected to limit setting as tips and tricks. It's like it's a set of steps that you walk through the same kind of way every time, and you have to get it exactly right or it won't work. And that just doesn't work. I think for me and my parenting, this idea that consistency isn't vital was liberating. It was just such a huge relief, because I'm actually not very good at consistency. That said, I have a child who's in great shape. It's like you're communicating your values about the world and what you think is important in all sorts of ways. They're not going to get the wrong idea because today you decide to let them watch the television because you can't handle the upset that's going to happen if you do get them to turn the television off or a screen. If you always sort of try to work around or avoid the limit, really, because you're afraid of the upset, things won't go well. But it's fine to do that sometimes if your overall assessment is that your sense of connection isn't strong enough. In general, you'll be fine if you keep a good, strong focus on connection. And I like to talk about a relationship bank balance. So if there's a lot of struggles and you're noticing that you're having to set a lot of limits, which means that you're hitting your limit is providing something for your child to hit up against, and they're having a lot of feelings, often that's a sign that there isn't enough connection credit in your relationship. Your relationship needs plenty of credit. That helps things to go well in general. And when you really have hit a spot where your child's carrying a lot of feelings and they're headed in the wrong direction and you really need to set a limit, they'll borrow from the credit in the bank, the connection credit in the bank. And that will mean that the limit setting is productive. It is relationship building rather than relationship damaging. If you've got the credit in the bank, then you've got room to move. And actually, one of the things it gives you is room to make mistakes, that your child has a place where they can hang on to a sense that you're really on their side, and that will get them through the places where you misstep. So this is a very useful way of thinking about it. You're never wasting your time to do something that's to do with building credit. And I'll talk a little bit later about what you can do to build credit. I just want to talk a little bit about the ways in which kids show you that they're off track. So the broken biscuit, right? So you've given them a sandwich and it's cut the wrong way. And this is, every parent will have a story of something that really hasn't worked. Of some tiny little thing. It can be infuriating that your child's incredibly upset about. And those things, once you understand this process, if you've got what it takes, those things are an opportunity for your child to have an upset about something. Usually, really underneath that is some really big thing. You may not ever really know what it is, but you can trust that when your child picks some tiny, we call it a pretext, they pick some tiny thing to be upset about, you can safely pay attention to them while they work through how they feel about that, knowing that it's probably about something else. They just don't have an understanding of the world or a sort of cognitive capacity yet to really articulate it, but it'll come out in little difficulties. The other thing kids will do is look at you and do the thing you've just asked them not to do. And it's like they're really looking for you to meet them there. That's a real challenge. And playful limit setting in that spot, so long as there's not some major safety issue, is incredibly powerful. But basically you've said, please don't tip the soil out of the plant, and you look over and there they are looking at you, tipping the soil out of the plant or pulling the cat's tail or whatever. That's a sign that they're off track and they need you to connect and to figure out how to set some kind of a limit. Other ways that show that children have lost their sense of connection and are carrying a big emotional backpack. Withdrawal, shyness is often a sign that a little one's carrying fear. So is aggression. Children unable to settle to an activity is often a sign that they're, off track and need some more connection. Unable to figure out some solution to a problem that's reasonable, and often can't make relaxed eye contact. How babies will just look at you. That's relaxed eye contact. When someone's carrying a whole lot of tension, they won't be able to do that. So, I don't know where I did that. There's a couple of boys a little off track. They're heading for some kind of struggle there. One of the other ideas that was incredibly useful to me is the idea of limit early and limit often. So limits are not something to be scared of. If you understand that they're part of the sort of web of relationship building in your family, they're just something that needs to happen. And often young ones will, if they're not in good shape, they'll show you that really early. It'll be by the time you get to the front door where they're not prepared to move, if you've known what to look for, there's probably been 10 signs that they were out of connection and off track. And it's definitely worth moving in early, particularly because you want to do it before you've lost your patience. Don't wait till you're at the end of your rope. Expect upsets. And as I said, big feelings come in small packages. I love this photo. The title of this photo is something like, "Daddy wouldn't let me have an ice cream from the truck." It's like she's having a big sadness about not being able to get something, which is probably standing in for all of the other things as a young person that she's wanted and hasn't been able to get. But it comes up around you saying no about the ice cream in the truck. And I don't know, it's just very sweet. If you understand that upsets are part of the process and that you don't have to stop them, you don't have to sort of fix them up, you can actually just let your child work through her great grief about not having the ice cream from the truck. Then next time you might let her have the ice cream from the truck. You've had this opportunity, or she might not want it. She might have, her sense of wanting has been sort of diminished and she's too busy playing to even notice that there is an ice cream truck around the corner. One of the things that playful limit setting plays around with is the idea of power and control. This is the elephant in the room, and it's the thing that I haven't found any other parenting approach that addresses this really clearly. You are in control of your relationship with your child. Like, you are the one who defines just about everything that happens. And that's a challenge, and that's necessary. Like, you have a big picture, you're capable, you have the resources, you have the information, you have a big picture about what's going on in the world. It's necessary that you be in charge, but it's very, very wearing on a young person. It's quite scary and hard being little in a big person's world. And children do really need a break. They need a chance to be in control in their relationship with you. And we teach a couple of listening tools. I'm going to talk mostly about play listening today, but I can't rave enough about the power of special time. But basically, both of them are about practicing putting your child in charge on a regular basis for a limited amount of time. Of course, you're always ultimately in charge. the safety manager, basically. But it is important to give your child a chance to show you things that they might not feel confident to show you in the normal course of events, and be in charge. And if you don't pay attention to that, what happens is that limit setting gets fouled up in the leftover feelings about being controlled all the time that young people have. So we need to find a place where we address that, where we get ourselves out of the way a bit to give them a bit more room to move. Yep. And we can do that in a really structured way. So if we have time later, I'll talk a little about special time, but it's basically a one-on-one playtime where you allow a child to do whatever they want to do, and you do your absolute best to follow them, to follow their lead there. Play listening is similar, but you have a bit more room to direct things if you need to. And play listening is the tool that connects with limit setting. Special time is an essential ingredient in a healthy limit setting relationship, because it really gives a child a sense of power and control, really when they're little, at your convenience. Gets trickier as they get older. And actually, something I forgot to say earlier, these tools work really well with children, younger children, under 12, probably a little bit younger than that. They need modification as your kids head into adolescence, and you're welcome to come and have a chat with me about what that looks like. And they work in different ways with kids who are not neurotypical. I think the fundamental principles are still the same, even if you're working with a child whose brain works a little creatively or differently. But sometimes, and particularly around using humor, kids who are atypical or neurodiverse, you'll need to experiment and you'll need to modify probably, but the principles are the same. So kids find living in a big people's world scary, and fear is serious. Fear is serious for good reasons. It was frightening once. And we carry around a recording of that experience. So something happened. Sometimes we know what it is, sometimes we don't. The thing is that we are looking to recover from those experiences of fear. And I actually think that's why people go to scary movies, because it's a safe way to dip your toe into fear, but you really know that you're safe. I can't watch scary movies. I just get too scared. I guess I know I'm safe, I can walk out, but yeah. So the trick here is that we can heal from fear when we know we're safe and connected. And a warm, playful tone in the way that you set limits will reassure your child that it's safe now and can break the grip of fear. So, yeah, there's probably a lot to say about that, but that's what I'll say for now. Yeah. So one of the challenges of limit setting is ending up in power struggles. I need to change this photo, but anyway. Power struggles aren't fun. They damage our relationship and they wear us out. And doing plenty of connection building will help sort of move you out of a phase in your relationship where you're having a lot of struggles. But often in power struggles, we get really caught on we get scared that if we don't win, that things will not go well. And sometimes there's a real safety issue at hand. But sometimes the best thing you can do to get to a point where whatever emotions are driving this struggle for your child, sometimes it's better to let go of the rope. And it really is like a tug of war. It's like you can have a tug of war and the strongest person will win. And sometimes our children have got more determination than we have. But if you let go of the rope, then the terms of the whole interaction are completely changed in a way that can be really useful. So power struggles, I think we get caught, and it's worth understanding that you have the option of letting go of the rope. And because consistency isn't vital, because you're not trying to teach your kids something, you're trying to help them through a spot where they're carrying emotional tension and they can't think. It doesn't matter if you let go of the rope sometimes. So a playful response to a difficulty means you can bring a limit without getting mean, because a lot of us struggle. I actually struggled to really have a warm enough tone around limit setting because it was pretty mean and harsh in my childhood, and you just automatically channel that. But a warm tone can mean that you can set a limit, that you can play around with it without getting mean. And the bottom line is, when you're setting any kind of limit, playful or otherwise, you are going against your child. And some of us worry about that, and we don't want to do that, and we don't want to disrespect our child. But that's a kind of confusion. What our children need is to know that we are really on their side. They also will experience you setting a limit as going against them. But if you've got enough connection credit in the bank, then you can get through that exercise in limit setting without damaging your relationship. Your child will borrow from the bank account. But playful limit setting gives you a way of going against her, but your playful tone reassures that you are on her side. And she needs that reassurance for this to be a productive experience, for it not to just be another experience of power and control over her. Playfulness also and laughter actually adds connection credit. So you get a double bonus if you can figure out how to set limits this way. You're breaking the tension. So you're adding connection while you're going against her. And it also has another bonus, which is that if you respond playfully around something that in the past you've been a little tense with your children about, they'll laugh. And the laughter is actually both about the tension that was just in the moment, but it's also about all the other times where you lost it with them and you didn't set the limit in a way that really, you were angry, for instance. So the laughter is healing from past experiences of conducting experiments and off track, either experiments or off track, endeavors that were met with a punishing, harsh, distancing tone from adults. That's hard on young people. And if you respond surprisingly playfully, what that will do is give them a chance to work through in their laughter from those past experiences. And then, as I said, like letting go of the rope, playfulness can sometimes just jump the whole thing out of the power struggle and into something that's more productive, that's more interesting, that's more connected. And from there, you'll be better able to figure out how to move things along. I love this quote: laughter is the shortest distance between two people. It's so true. It's so true. Attributed to Victor Borge, who I think was some kind of funny man, clown, actor. Anyway, I like that quote. So, playful limit setting is a variation on one of our listening tools, which we call play listening. So, it's different from casual play. The main ingredients are that your child is in charge, that the general rule is that your children will win. And I should add here that generally that a guide that you've got it right is there's plenty of good loose laughter from your children, and I have to say often from you. You'll probably laugh as well. And the powerful thing about play listening is that you can do it anytime, anywhere, with any number of young people. So we teach a listening tool called Special Time, and people sometimes experiment with doing it in a public place. And it's this listening tool where you really put your attention on the child and you're delighted with them and you do what they want to do. If you're in a park, that acts like a magnet for every other kid in the park. And before you know where you are, you're going to have 6 kids there wanting to play with you. And at that point, it's stopped being special time, which is a one child thing. But play listening comes in handy. You can set up a chasing game, or I don't know, be the monster, or something that engages all of these kids and gets everyone laughing. So that's play listening. And what we're doing in play listening is we're following the laughter. So laughter reduces tension, releases tension and reduces stress. It dissolves fears and embarrassments. There's a reason why people make jokes about topics that have a lot of social tension on them. It's because social tension is kind of an itch that we have to scratch. And telling jokes and getting to laugh about that is a way of relieving the itch. It doesn't have to be mean and nasty and disrespectful, but that's just in our culture, joke telling is kind of a place where people get to laugh. And the reason they're laughing is because it's a joke that somehow creates a little bit of space around an issue that has a lot of social tension on it. But when people are laughing, they're resolving lighter fears and embarrassments. And as a young person, young people are carrying around a lot of lighter fears and embarrassments. Laughter also builds a very deep connection. It's really connecting. If you're laughing together is a great way to build a relationship. And it builds where you set up play where your child is not being overpowered. So tickling is not something that would qualify. Tickling overpowers a child, puts them in a situation where it's difficult for them to tell you that they want you to stop. You don't want to do that. You want to. Kids who've been tickled a lot will often ask to be tickled, I think, because they figured out that that's the only light-hearted way some adults can figure out how to connect. If a child does ask you to tickle them, try and figure out how to set up the game so that eventually you get tickled, or if you slow it right down and threaten to I'm going to tickle you, I'm going to tickle you, if I can get you, I'm going to tickle you, they'll laugh. And you don't actually have to tickle them to laugh, to get them to laugh. And the laughter that they do at that point is actually often about, well, they're touching on fear. Being tickled actually installs fear. And you can do it anywhere with anyone. So you want to notice what makes your child laugh. Your child generally needs to be in the powerful role. So this is this dad doing a great job of chasing his son. If you saw the photograph a bit bigger, the boy's got this big grin on his face. You'll need to adjust what you do based on what your child needs you to do. So chasing games are about the most basic kind of play listening you can do. There'll be somewhere in the chasing game, whether it's them chasing you or you chasing them or several kids ganging up on you or some variation on a chasing game where they get to laugh a lot. With a 2-year-old, the chasing game is you being incredibly incompetent and maybe just managing to kind of scrape their back as they run off. I still have a torn hamstring from a chasing game with a 12-year-old boy where I had to run as hard as I possibly could. I would just get to kind of just touch him really working hard, and he would laugh. And the place, things sat really tightly for him. That was where he could laugh, where I could nearly get him, but I had to be really on the edge of what I could do. So you'll adjust how you meet your child here based on how competent they are, really. And it never hurts for you. You'll be fine if you can't chase them. You just need to embrace the incompetence. Children just dying for an opportunity to laugh about us being the ones who don't know. So in play listening, you can play around with fear by you being the more scared person. I'm going to talk about swimming lessons in a minute, but that's a great place where you can do. A lot of children are really scared of getting in the water and swimming lessons for a bunch of reasons. And it's a wonderful opportunity to play around with the limit and with fear and taking some time. But you can act really scared of the water, and I'd almost bet that your kid will get to laugh and may actually be able to shift into a powerful position there and start telling you how you should jump in the water or whatever. There's a whole bunch of things going on there, but basically that's play listening. The child's shifting into a powerful role. They're working through a bunch of feelings from that position. If you want to jump your child into a powerful role, all you need to do is mumble your words, act foolish, look stupid, be cheerfully bumbling, and most children will be delighted. A friend of mine who's a childcare worker just told me a story about how there's a bunch of kids sitting in this in a circle in a childcare center, and she walked across and she just tripped a little bit on the carpet, and the whole there was a little laugh went right around the room. It's like, it's such a struggle to be a young person and learning stuff. To have an adult vacate that position and willingly let themselves be laughed at is just an enormous relief. So you want to be affectionate, warm, active, enthusiastic, willing, and you want to be physical. But as I said, you don't want to overwhelm them. Don't tickle. It's just too controlling. They're laughing, but they're not in charge. And it turns out that through laughter, children can work on really important issues around separation, feelings of powerlessness, feelings of not being wanted. So a child who prefers mummy over daddy, just to give you an example, you can play a game called She's Mine, which is basically you can tug of war, pick her up or him up and fight over who wants him most. Children will laugh and laugh and laugh. What they're laughing about is they're laughing off the feeling of not being wanted, because you're overplaying wanting them in a playful kind of way. Sometimes in this kind of play, people get hurt. My husband, I shouldn't say this out loud, but my husband and I managed to dislocate my child's elbow in one of these games and had to explain to the GP, who promptly just popped it back in, how we'd come to have this accident, which is a bit funny, but it's worth playing physically, and sometimes things happen. Mostly, if it's going to take less than a week to heal from, it's probably okay. We get way too worried about safety, and children find that infuriating. So it's good to play around with it. Children will work on stories around, on feelings around being incompetent, on struggling to learn something, on not knowing something. They can work on feelings of being disrespected. You may be able to set up a play listening game. Children will often play out what they've seen, and they'll have some doll be nasty to some other doll. That's play listening. Children will work on winning and losing. That's often a big thing. Kids carry a lot of tension around because there's a whole lot of rules in our culture about how you're supposed to behave around winning and losing, and it's actually quite tricky emotionally. They'll also tend to work on embarrassments. So for some small examples here, so when your child won't clean their teeth, you could give them a lecture about how important it is for them to clean their teeth. And you'd be right, but they already know that. What you could do is pick up the toothbrush and try cleaning under their arm. Or you could give them a chance to clean your teeth, and then you could kind of sort of pretend to choke and spit it out, or eat the toothbrush, or, you know, anything that's sort of out of the ordinary, out of the straight up and down of how things should be done. Your child will laugh. And sometimes with enough of that, the fear that's got in their way of being prepared to let you put the toothbrush in their mouth and clean their teeth will resolve. I think sometimes that's a good example of something which is often a pretext for a much bigger experience. I wouldn't be surprised. When my daughter was born, the first thing they had to do was intubate her, which is put something down her, I think up her nose or down her throat. Anyway, I reckon that sometimes putting things in your children's mouth brings up that sort of memory. And what they're resisting is the feelings that go with that. And if you can play around that memory, as well as the difficulty around cleaning teeth, but the memory that's connected to, that's pulling up big feelings, that is resolved as well. The tension in that is resolved as well. If you have a child who won't let you change we would call it a nappy. In some places in the world, it's called a diaper. You can do, it's the kind of thing where your natural, well, if you're anything like me, your natural response is to want to get the thing on. And that doesn't tend to build connection credit, that attitude. You could get some big adult pull-ups, and you could play around with her doing the nappy for you, or you putting the diaper or the nappy on your head, or I don't know, putting the nappy or the diaper on a teddy, and the teddy could keep trying to get up and I don't know what. It doesn't really matter, but just playing around with it. It's a limit. The topic is putting on your diaper or putting on your nappy, but it's you're holding it out there, and then you're playing around with it, and tension resolves. As I said, I think it's I see so many parents, and I remember myself struggling with the whole business of swimming lessons. And I wish that the lovely young people who often do the swimming lessons, it's a bit like starting school and feelings around separation. I wish that there was an understanding that this is a fantastic opportunity to help a child work through some fear in a light way. But basically, you can play listen. The limit is we're going to do the swimming lesson, but you may at some point need to present it so firmly that if there's big feelings, it turns into an upset. But for a way long time before that, you can play around with it. It's still a limit, but you might put your toe in the pool and then jump out. It's too cold, I don't want to go swimming in there. Or you could be unhappy with the way your bathers are sitting, or just generally mucking around, so that your child is getting to laugh about the thing that's on the agenda. Getting out the door is another one that some of these things we tend to leave. Like, as I said, there may well have been 10 things before you got to the door and you have to leave. If you can catch it earlier when you've still got time, it will work better. But it's I actually think there's something to be said for setting up an opportunity when you actually don't have to leave, so that you can set it up so that you're about to get out the door. And then there's room for some playing about, I mean, you could go out one door and come back in the other door, or keep forgetting things that you need to take with you, and they get more and more outrageous. Just silly playing around, and your children will laugh, and it will, as I said, it will resolve the tension around that transitional routine in the day. And sometimes, you know, children struggle with not wanting to try something new. A friend of mine was, she told me this story about babysitting, and the mum had gotten some pencils out and had started sort of drawing, and the child just took one look at these really competent drawings, like they were trying to do it together. The child looked at these really competent drawings and just said, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to draw. And my friend who was doing the babysitting said, oh, so I said, let me have a go. And I put the paper down and I made a scrawl across it, and I put the crayon on and broke the crayon and was pretended to be upset about that. And that's play listening. That gave the child room to show her how to do the drawing, and that's shifting things around so that your child can take charge and she can laugh at you a bit. So that's just some examples of where trying to tell them what to do probably won't work, and there's another way that's worth trying. And like I said, those things are things you will have to handle in the moment. And sometimes you just have to bundle your kid into the car and get going. And that's okay. Then do some playing or some special time later to make sure that that firm limit that happened there, and they probably protested, is balanced by some connection credit, depositing some connection credit in the relationship. But where you can, often those things are really predictable, and they're often around transitions, and it's hard to be relaxed and playful at those times. So you can come back to it later. So you could play around with teeth cleaning for, you know, half an hour earlier in the day. There's no reason why you have to wait until the moment when the thing actually has to be done, where you're likely to be a little more tense about getting it done. You can play around with it at your convenience when you don't actually have to get out the door. And just a word of warning, once a child is shaken off lighter fears and embarrassments, often what's available is a bigger upset. So it's important to understand that that's part of the process, and that sometimes laughter turns to tears. And sometimes it can just happen as you're having a good old wrestle and they knock themselves a little bit, and suddenly there's a huge, big upset. And they may accuse you of having knocked them, and whether or not that's true really isn't. It doesn't matter. When children blame us, it's a way of them sort of personalizing the big feeling they've got, and they give it to us and they turn us into the problem. And that's something concrete that they can work with. Sometimes the feeling is just too big and they need to kind of put it on someone. But basically the way this works is that closeness with you gives children the safety to show how they feel. And sometimes big feelings come up. They'll cry, they'll sweat, they'll tantrum, they'll rage. And that's okay. You can just stay and listen. And I'll find the slide that's about stay listening. You can comfortably stay and listen, keep things safe, keep them contained enough that they're not going to hurt themselves or someone else, and let that feeling blow off. And often what you'll find, either straight away if you're lucky, or if it's a thing that's been a problem for a while, you may find you need several exercises of this kind, plenty of playing, and then suddenly there's a big upset and you listen through the upset and you find that suddenly you'll notice, oh, we've got out of the house really easily for a while now. I wonder when it was that we last had a problem. Like, because we're always moving on to the next problem, we often don't notice that something that was difficult has become easier. But it'll be because you've put attention to it in this kind of way. I just want to, so this is stay listening. This is where big feelings that come up in behind the playful approach. And you can confidently stop and listen if you've got the time. You want to move close and be warm in your tone. You're making it safe. That's another topic. Expect feelings to erupt. Take the time and space to listen to them. When they're in that place, your children will tend, as I said, to put it on you. So you have to decide not to take it personally. They actually don't mean it. They will target you because they need to make this big thing that's worrying them concrete, and they don't mean it. It's a sign of how safe they feel with you. Confine yourself to 5 words or less. You really don't need to solve the problem. You don't need to fix it up. You don't need to argue. You just listen and try not to stop the crying or the emotional outburst. I know. Yeah, I know. You don't need to do a running commentary. You're just there. You try to stay relaxed. You just let them go. And notice how your child is afterwards. So that's the end of this. There's always more things to say. If you want to know about special time, ask. But you can learn more about what I do, and I'd love to hear your stories and be of assistance where I can. So do stay in touch. And I like to acknowledge the photos. Actually, photos are incredibly complicated. It's quite a big job, but I do enjoy finding just the right one. So, have you any questions or something that I need to just clear up? Have we got anything?
We don't have any at the moment, but feel free to put them in now if you've thought of anything. We do have some time. We have about 15 minutes left. But let me open the question box. No, there's none at the moment. This will be recorded and on our Randwick Council site, and Madeline will be sending you out the link to the recording if you want to share it, and some resources with that offer of the 20-minute consultation. So I do not see any questions. I just want to say something, Madeline. I think it's fantastic for us to hear this, because for me, it's reminding myself I might not have got that kind of parenting, and it's really great to learn these skills of play and how to set boundaries in a very kind and loving and appropriate way with our children, possibly rather than the way our parents, who did the best they could and knew what they knew and their generation, did with me.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate all the learning and wisdom that you bring to these workshops. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions from people who got in touch with me. Do you want to, shall I read one of them out?
Yeah, sure.
This is a good question.
People feel free to stay on or leave if you have to go. But yeah, I'd love to hear the questions. Thank you.
So this person asks, and it's not specifically about playful limit setting, but how to set limits while co-parenting, how to set limits with a strong-willed child who's living in 2 households. What I would say is that this is a whole topic really, but children can handle considerable differences in parenting style. And so long as there's a place somewhere where they get to be able to show where it's hard and have struggles and have you listen to them around those, they will work out where the difference in parenting styles confuses them. And that confusion is really just a tension that you can give them a hand working through. So they understand that things are different in dad's house than mum's house. And you don't need, I mean, you're probably living separately because you had trouble getting your partner to parent the way you wanted them to parent in the first place. You've got even less chance now that you're separated. And I think in general, it's okay. What you need to understand is that if often one of the scenarios is that there's a lot of pretty heavy-handed limit setting goes on in one household, and you're dealing with the consequences of that when the kids end up with you. Firm limit setting, abuse is not okay, but firm limit setting actually never hurt anybody. In some ways, permissiveness and a real tentativeness around wanting to set limits actually is harder on young people. They can handle firm limit setting, but they will have things they need to tell a parent or an adult they're close to about how hard that is. So one of the things that happens when you have a separated household is you still have a relationship bank account that includes, you have several accounts, and one of them is all of the people in the family. And to some extent, what's happening often is that in a separated relationship, you have to put in more deposits. And actually, you don't have to be separated for this to be the case. You may be the one who's really good at building connection credit that the other parent uses a lot of because they tend to end up in fairly heavy-handed limit setting. And the emotional safety will not be damaged if you understand that that's the deal, that what you need to do is when your kids come to you, you're piecing them together again, you're dealing with their feelings about the separation, either from their other parent or the way it felt for them to be away from you, and you're making sure there's plenty of connection credits that you're depositing using special time and playful play listening whenever you can, in order that they can go back to the other parent and handle the way things are in that household. But you can have the way things are in my household be different from the way things are in the other household, and that's not necessarily a disaster. If you can talk about it or get a third party to help you talk about it, that's probably better. But I think we worry a lot that our children will be confused, and I think we can help them work through that, and it doesn't have to be damaging. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's excellent. And maybe that's a topic we could explore in depth in the next parenting calendar. Even for couples that are not separated or divorced,
Yeah.
I think I think parents and carers can have a lot of judgment on different parenting styles. And even maybe it's not just about separated parents and divorced parents, but within one household.
Yeah.
And that's actually okay for the child. I think that'd be really helpful because that's nothing I've heard before. I've always heard, you have to be consistent and that might be a really great topic for the next
it's a
parenting
good
calendar.
topic because you have to be consistent, and then you feel bad because you can't actually get this relationship so that both of the adults are behaving consistently. And it's like, well, what do you do with that? You're being asked to do something that's unworkable. How do you kind of supplement? Yeah. So then,
unless the child is playing one off the other, and I think we then need to have ways of managing that too. So, understanding that people are different, but we don't want the child learning to manipulate that situation.
Yes, and that there's always room. The better you can communicate with your co-parent, the better things will go. So, but yes, but a lot of the time,
I think setting boundaries in general is a great topic, and maybe we'll explore that for the tweens and teens too, because I do think people struggle with that, particularly in our generation.
Yeah.
So, or the, the people who are younger and parenting now.
Yeah. So
There's no other questions?
I've got another question. It says,
Is that on the screen? Because I don't see it.
no, it's not. Someone wrote
Oh,
me
okay,
a
from you.
question.
Okay, good.
So, I have trouble getting my daughter to do things like coming to have dinner on time. Good luck. Often she's immersed in something like, say, drawing something, and I try to encourage her to pause her beautiful drawing and come back to it later, but it doesn't work. And I've tried giving her a heads up, and that doesn't work. So I'm not sure what to do. This is a great question. It goes to something that's a really big confusion for us as parents, which is that we'll often warn our children, and we warn them hoping that what we'll meet is their rational thinking mind, and that they'll use the information that we're giving them. Dinner's going to be in 10 minutes, you'll have to stop playing. And they'll get themselves organized and they'll be all ready to come to dinner because we've given them a warning. And actually, warnings are something different altogether. Warnings are a kind of limit. And when you give a child a warning, if you're thinking about it from that framework, what you've done is they're chuffing along, having a great time doing their drawing. You've brought a limit, which is, sweetheart, there's going to be dinner soon. And they will have some feelings. And the feelings are part of the process. And the feelings are probably, this is an example of it, it's a pretext. So it's not at all unreasonable for you to ask them, to get them, not ask, to get them to stop playing so they can eat their dinner. That's not an unreasonable limit, but it's working as a limit because they really want to be doing something else. So you bring the limit, it's dinner time. Their feelings come up, and probably those feelings are about the thousands of times as a little person in a big person's world, they've had something they wanted to keep doing and they weren't able to do it. If someone limited us as adults the way we necessarily limit young people, we'd go nuts. So you need to understand that the warning is part of the limit setting process, and the upset is what's necessary to get through the frustration that comes up for them around having to stop what they're doing. And this is also a really great question because we talk about bringing the limit. Not you sort of, it's a limit setting exercise, but the thing you have to do is bring the limit. So we'll often from the other side of the room, hi honey, it's dinner time. It's dinner time in 10 minutes. Come on, wrap up your play. And they just pretend they haven't seen it, heard it at all, right? And we might escalate we might get sort of less and less patient in the way we communicate that. And that just creates more tension in the whole interaction. What we need to do at that point, and it is hard because often dinner time is kind of one of those times where the reason that our kids get a bit off track is because our attention is sucked off in the business of making dinner, and they don't do well if they don't have a sense of connection. So there are predictable times when children tend to go off track. When you're on the phone with little kids is another one, because they can tell your attention's gone somewhere else. So anyway, you need to stop what you're doing, walk around the island bench, go to the other side of the room where the kids are, and put your hand on the drawing or whatever it is. Sweetheart, it's time to stop. So you bring the limit and then you wait to see what kind of upset there is. Now, if there's a lot of feelings in your kid's backpack at that point, they'll probably get upset. But that's also an example where playful limit setting would probably work really well. You could send yourself up, the dinner will it'll be completely ruined if you don't come. Like, you want to send yourself up, or you might be able to turn it. I'm not, as I said, I'm not the best player, and chasing games really are like 101, and they actually work quite well. So if you can oh, I'm going to pick you up and can I, you know, a lot of parents figure out race, like, I'll race you to the kitchen table or something. The reason that works, if it does work, is because it's basically just, it's taken the tension off and you've joined them and you're doing something that's fun. Yeah. The other thing I'd say about meal times is it's a really, really common thing that parents struggle with. And my take on it largely is that for most of us, meal times were quite tense. There's a lot of tension around meal times, doing meal times together, and anxiety about children eating enough. And those things get in the way of us being relaxed in that interaction. And that's part of what makes the difficulty. So half of it's our story, I think, around eating and meals and stuff, for a whole bunch of reasons. It's like, I just spent an hour and a half cooking this meal and you don't want to eat it. It's like, that's my feeling. And there's a way of interacting around that that's not so tense, that will probably move things along better. If that didn't get too complex.
Excellent.
So,
yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, really great. Thank you for that example. Anything else, Madeline? Because we're coming up to 11:30 now.
That's fine. I could talk the leg off a table. So
okay, well, that was wonderful.
Good to have a time limit.
Yeah, everyone, I just want to let you know, you should be getting an email within the week with the recording and the resources again. So thank you so much, Madeline. That was really informative.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.